So next up is Mason Leshina, who's going to introduce you to Atlas Island. Welcome to the stage, Mason.
Thank you very much. Honor. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. So Atlas Island, it's a relatively new project, so I'll start by talking a little bit about who we are and what we plan to do. So we're an international community of liberty-minded individuals who believe in freedom and individual sovereignty. Our members range from classical liberals, libertarians, anarcho-capitalists, and they're all around the world. We have about 300 members currently. What we're looking to do is build a new society based on a few key concepts. The first of those being natural law and negative rights. Basically, we think that others should not interfere with your right to live as you choose, and as long as you leave someone else alone, then you should be able to free to do what you want to do. We also agree that all interactions between people within our community should be based on voluntary association and non-aggression, the core libertarian principles. Now, where we differ from other libertarians, which I used to be, is that frankly we're tired of arguing and fighting the political fight to make this happen. We want to achieve liberty in our lifetime, and we want to do it without arguing or convincing all the other people who have grown up in the state education system to agree with us. So what we've done is we've established and come up with a very pragmatic approach to achieving this liberty within our lifetime. So before I tell you about our approach, I want to talk a little bit more about our vision. So this project was inspired by the combined ideas of seasteading, which you heard about from Joe Quirk, and private cities, which you heard about multiple times throughout this conference. And we're looking to combine the best aspects of both of those ideas. So from seasteading, we get the concept that you can own your own vessel, and when you move out to international waters, you're outside the jurisdiction of any nation state. So it obviates the need to negotiate with the countries to try to obtain these concessions for special economic zones and all the political hiccups that can occur with that. In addition to that, the beauty of having your own vessel where you primarily live is, one, most of your investment is in something that you own, and two, you are able to easily move that vessel wherever you want. So if you're living somewhere and you don't like how things are going within your new community, which started out as a libertarian community, but may now have digressed into, a more socialist community, you don't have to sell everything and move this huge ordeal to move. You just take your vessel and you go somewhere else where you think that you're being treated better. So it really gives you that freedom to move without the hassle of selling things or without the minimalism required to be a perpetual traveler. And from the Free Private Cities Foundation, we get the concept of private service providers offering governance and that marketplace of ideas, that marketplace, that communal square. Because as great as it is to be independent and free by yourself, really what makes life enjoyable is the ability to interact with others, to trade, to have a market, and to have that community that you identify with. So we're looking to combine those concepts and have floating platforms that are operated each as a private city and that allow you people to bring their vessels to these platforms, dock there, and interact in this marketplace. And given that they'd be operating as free private cities, when you come with your vessel to this platform, you'd sign a resident agreement, which would lay out very clearly in contractual form what your interaction would be with everyone on the platform and with the platform itself. And the great thing about combining these two is not only do you get the benefits of the private cities, but you also have that competition, and it's a very low barrier of entry for the people who are on their private vessels, whether that's a boat, a sea pod, or an archetype platform. They can just move to another platform. So it really encourages competition between those platforms for residents and really lowers that barrier of competition. And will incentivize high quality, low cost governance. So what's the plan that we came up with? It's a 5-stage plan because nothing happens immediately. I mean, if I said, go buy a sea pod, live out in the ocean by yourself, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. No one wants to live by themselves, and there's no one there, so there's no one to move with. So we came up with this 5-stage process to make this happen in a reasonable time frame. An online community is the first step. Following that, we want people to actually start living together in a marina. And then we'd move that community from a marina to a floating platform in a protected harbor where you can continue to develop the technologies. And then from there, we would go to a coastal community and finally an offshore community. So let me talk a little bit more about each of these steps. So stage one is the online community. That's where we're currently at. And here we're looking to build up our network, essentially, a network state, maybe a decentralized autonomous organization of individuals who are like-minded and share our goals. This will draw from a number of crowds. Seasteaders, for one, the people who are at this conference, anyone who's interested in private cities, private governance, as well as libertarians in general who become disillusioned with the process. And then there's a large community of people already living on vessels in marinas that we can draw from that, frankly speaking, often share our same philosophy but don't express it so explicitly. So we've got a large community of people to recruit from, and the goal is to build up a network of people with similar values. And while we're doing that, we'd like to compile a set of resources for the people who aren't yet living on vessels to help them make that gradual transition from living on land to living on a vessel, because it is a big leap into the water there. As well, this would give us time to develop a market of people, so the demand side of the equation, for companies like Ocean Builders or Arctide to actually build the technologies upon which people will live. There could be, like I said, the Seapod, the platform, solar-powered catamarans. There's lots of options that are currently being developed. And I think once you have a demand of 10, 20, 30,000 people who want to do this, it will drive that market of platforms and services. As well, this would allow us to have time to develop where we want to move when it comes to the marina and eventually offshore community. So in stage one, again, we're looking to build a network of people online, but even within that stage, we're going to encourage our members to start living on vessels locally. So that means you could buy a catamaran, you could buy a Seapod, wherever you are, stay where you are in the first stage, join us online, start developing the plan, but sell your house for $500,000 and buy a Seapod, start living on the ocean. And then when we're ready to move to the next stages, you're already prepared. You've already got that investment in your personal vessel that you own, and it makes it a lower barrier of entry to move to the next stage. So speaking of that, stage two, this is where we get people starting to live together. Because again, a lot of this is based on the social and economic dynamics of things. So once we have enough people living on vessels in an area, so let's say you've got a lot of people living in Florida, Texas, Louisiana, then you've got another group living in Europe in the Mediterranean area, we'd like to identify a regional hub for each of these groups of people that is easy enough to move to, but allows people to move together. And we're looking again at one location at least within the United States and at least one location within Europe. That way people can move to a location without worrying about immigration issues. Within the Eurozone you can move, and within the United States you can move as well, and that will allow everyone to move into close proximity. And the advantage of this is not just that it gets everyone in one place, but that we also start developing the actual community. Because again, you don't want the chicken and egg scenario. And if we're in a harbor, or in a marina, next to a city, you have all the resources of the city, but you also have that chance that now let's say there's 20, 30 of us living together. One of us is a plumber, one of us is, a physician. We have all these different people with different skills, and we can start preferentially dealing with each other in a form of agorism. Number one, to start, enacting technologies like Bitcoin, blockchain, things like that. And number two, to build up that resiliency as a community so that we can actually supply the services that are needed to live a productive and enjoyable life. And I call this intra-marina economic ties that we'd look to develop. As well, during this stage, we'd continue to refining designs for the larger platforms, which is where the vessels would dock. And we'd start looking at formally how to develop organizations to raise funds for those platforms. Because when it comes to buying your own vessel, that's a purchase that each individual person would make and own on their own. But when it comes to the platforms, we suspect that those would be operated as an organization, whether that's a cooperative or a for-profit entity. But in either case, there's many options, and there could be a variety of platforms run in a variety of manners. And at this stage, we'd be looking to have the people come together to actually develop those platforms and those organizations. So once we've got that large enough marina community and we've finalized plans for platforms, we would then move that marina community onto one of those floating platforms. So let's say you're in a marina and nearby there's a sheltered harbor. What you can do then is essentially take a floating barge and put a bunch of docks next to it, connect them all together, make a floating platform that's got some space on top that you could have some basic buildings that would serve as stores and a marketplace for the communal aspects of things. And then the docks where each individual can bring their floating vessel and dock up to that floating marina, as we call it, or floating platform. And the advantage here is that you'd still be in sheltered waters because you're in a harbor. So this harbor provides some protection from the elements of the open ocean, and it also provides that economic lifeline to the city that you're nearby. Again, we're going to work to develop the community connections within that harbor and on that platform. So ideally, at this stage, you'd start doing most of your economic activity on that platform. I mean, ideally, there'd be stores and restaurants and other businesses that you interact with. But it'd still be a short boat ride away to the main community, the main city nearby. So it allows you time to continue to refine and develop that functional independence necessary to actually move out and be a productive community. And while you're living on that platform, as I mentioned, it would be operated as a privately run platform. So you'd have that residence agreement by the general service provider operating the platform that everyone agrees to adhere to while they're on that platform. Additionally, in the harbor, you'd start looking at the other technologies that are necessary to live independently in the ocean. So that will be things like power infrastructure, water production, sewage management. All of these infrastructure pieces can be developed while you're in the platform, because in the harbor you still have access to those resources. In the next stage, you won't. So that's, again, that kind of next step that we'll be taking in this stage 3 of the development. Moving on to stage 4, we take that entire platform, and maybe there's a couple of them in different harbors throughout the world or in a regional area, and we can now start moving them into an area that's offshore, but not outside of the territorial water. So I'm thinking, 5, 10 kilometers offshore, in an area that's still got close access to land, that is still within the reach of the Coast Guard if you need emergency assistance. And what this really is, it's kind of like a final beta test of all the things you've developed in stages 1, 2, and 3. Because now you're essentially living on the water. You're outside of the harbor, you're in the ocean waters, and you should ideally be self-sufficient, but it still gives you that time to test out the kinks and work out all those details and make sure everything is ready to go for the final stage. The important point to know is that in stages 1 to 4, because you're still living within the territorial boundaries of your host country, you would still be abiding by those laws. So really what this is all a lead up to the final stage where we actually do achieve that liberty. And in the interim, you can, like I said, enact some principles of agorism. So start using Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies and start having a more private economy with these cryptocurrencies. But functionally, you still have to obey the laws of the country that you're hosted in. So once we've got enough of these and we've kind of become comfortable in the coastal area, then that's the time to actually move this community out into the open waters, which is stage 5, the offshore community. And like I said, the beauty is by this time, we will already have developed a community. There will be a large number of people living on multiple platforms, and they will have already tested these technologies close to shore. And they will already have developed enough of a circular economy that you can be functionally independent from an economic perspective. Obviously, we would still be trading with other people, but you're not looking to make grocery runs to the mainland every day once you've gotten to this stage. So we would then select a location based primarily on weather. And there's a lot of areas, particularly in the equatorial Atlantic and Pacific, that are conducive to reasonably priced platforms being stable in the ocean, where we could locate this platform and bring all these platforms from around the world into one location, which is what we would call Atlas Island. And in case you haven't picked up on it yet, Atlas Island, the book Atlas Shrugged, is where we got inspiration from. So everyone who wants to leave will have a location, not Galt's Gulch, but close enough that we can actually move to and have that freedom that we're looking for. Again, these platforms would operate as private cities, and at this stage, they would actually be providing all the services of a governance organization, because we wouldn't be having, the Coast Guard or the security forces of the nation. So at this stage, we'd be functionally independent. What does that mean? It means that we'd essentially be operating as a cruise ship. So while we would be flying the flags of a country to maintain legality, make sure we're not flagged as pirates and taken down by the navies, it would mean that we would have as much autonomy as cruise ships, which is quite a lot. And additionally, because we'd have so many different platforms and vessels here, would be a fairly large market for the flags that we're flying. And countries like Bahamas or Panama or Liberia, they would potentially be open to negotiation at this stage for further liberty. So we start off with the liberty that they're offering under their flags. For example, you flag in the Bahamas, you already have no income tax and relatively few regulations. But when we get out here, we can then start pitting these against each other and basically saying, hey, Bahamas, you want to keep our business instead of us going to Panama? Why don't you offer us this additional liberty that we're looking for? And then you can have a marketplace, not just of platforms that you dock at, but flags that you fly that provide that underlying governance framework. So that's kind of the overall plan. I'll just kind of summarize it again to make sure everyone's on the same page, because I know it's a lot and I could have talked for an hour and a half on this subject. But in summary, we're an international community looking to achieve liberty in our lifetime through a combination of seasteading and private cities concepts. The primary idea is that each person would own a vessel that would be completely theirs, and over that vessel they would be sovereign. They would then use that vessel to dock at platforms. Those platforms would be operated as private cities. And because you'd have so many individual vessels and so many different platforms, there would be a true marketplace of governance with a very low barrier of movement between them, which would encourage the development of good quality governance at a low cost and different options based on what people's preferences and desires are. And not just that, but because we take into the concept of seasteading, you not just have competition between governance providers, but you have competition between flagging states for both those governance providers as well as the individual people on their vessels. So The amazing thing about this is that we can have essentially as much liberty as we want. I mean, we're not going to raise a flag and say that we're a sovereign country and demand that we be let into the UN, because frankly, I don't care about that. I just want to be able to live how I want and, have the freedom to escape the current system. And the beauty of the way that we're approaching it with this is, number one, it's a feasible and stepwise approach. And number two is that this is all entirely possible under the current legal regime of admiralty law without any political discussion, debate, or argument. So we can stop arguing, we can start seasteading, and we can incorporate the concepts of private cities to allow us to achieve freedom without any need for negotiation and without any threat that negotiations that we had would be revoked. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time listening, and I'm happy to answer questions outside of the booth after my talk.
Thank you, Mason.